Hello, everyone. My name is Troy Mix, and I'm Associate Director with the University of Delaware's Institute for Public Administration, IPA for short. Welcome to the May 1st edition of a Local Government Lunch and Learn webinar series co-sponsored by IPA and the City Management Association of Delaware. Today's topic is telework. And before we get to the speaker, I'll just remind you to please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box on the Zoom call as the presentation is going on. We hope to have time to cover many of them during the 30 minutes today. So with that, let's get to the presentation. And I'm pleased to welcome today's speaker, who is Human Resources Administrator for the City of Milford, Jamesha Eaddy. Jamesha, it is all yours.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah.
It's all yours, Jamesha.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. Happy Friday, everyone. I hope you're doing well and staying safe. In today's presentation, we will cover the basics of telework. We'll also have a few polling questions. Please feel free to ask questions. We can use these sessions as an opportunity to learn from each other. So let's get started. In this presentation, we will discuss assessing telework arrangements, trends in teleworking, benefits for employers, benefits for employees, the drawbacks of teleworking, and then we'll have an interactive discussion if there's any comments or questions. The Telework Enhancement Act defines telework or teleworking as a work flexibility arrangement under which an employee performs the duties and responsibilities of such employee's position or other authorized activities from an approved work site other than the location from which the employee would otherwise work. In practice, telework is a work arrangement that allows an employee to perform work during any part of regular paid hours at an approved alternate work location. Next slide, please. Recently, SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resource Management, conducted a poll on work from home strategies. Since a large percentage of us were now working from home in different industries. For the first poll, I'd like to have everyone answer the question, where are you set up to work from home?
So it looks like most of us are set up to work at our dining room tables.
And that's pretty interesting too, because that's generally my go-to place to work from home. The SHRM poll also had a few other creative strategies, such as working in the garage, that I thought was pretty interesting. So you'll see some pretty funny graphics on there, but I think we all take a different approach, to how we set up to work from home. Next slide, please. The first part of a telework arrangement is starting with an assessment. Supervisors and employees should consider the following factors in making an honest assessment about telework capabilities and opportunities. This list is just a small segment of questions that you can ask to basically make an assessment of how much telework should be done, or if any telework should be done at all. The first question, do you have sufficient portable work to telework and for the amount of telework proposed? Will your telework impact your coworkers? Do they need you to be in the office to complete work? Will they be doing extra work because you are teleworking? Are you willing to be flexible about the telework arrangement to respond to the needs of the supervisor and your coworkers? For example, if you're generally teleworking on Wednesdays, but they need you to come in for a meeting on that Wednesday, are you flexible to meet the needs so that the work can continue? Do you have the ability to work with minimal direct supervision? Are you organized? Do you have good planning skills? Do you have effective time management skills? Are you comfortable with learning new technologies required to work? I know since COVID-19, some people are using GoToMeeting, Zoom, Adobe Connect. So it's going to be important if you're working from home to be able to utilize technology or be willing to learn new technologies. Do you have the ability to ensure good communication with coworkers and customers? Do you have the ability to return phone calls and other messages in a timely manner? Is your telework space safe and conducive to getting your work done? Will you have constant distractions such as friends, television, children, and other responsibilities? Are dependent care arrangements in place? How will you protect confidential information? And this assessment is really important because if you allow a telework arrangement and if you go through the assessment and the assessment's not favorable, at some point you're going to end up with some factors of performance issues with some employees. If you went through the list and they don't have good time management skills or they don't have good planning skills, they might not be able to work independently with a telework arrangement. So that's one thing that you definitely have to keep in mind. Also, a good starting approach is to have a written agreement for a short trial period. And during that time, it will be important for the supervisor and the employee to have frequent dialogue and conversation about what's working well, what can be improved. I think one of the things that's most important is not is waiting until there's several issues with someone teleworking before you address it. That communication is going to be important during that time, particularly when they're not in the office and you don't have that much face-to-face interaction. Next slide, please. These are some trends in teleworking that was published by Global Workforce Analytics in March of 2020. 5 million employees currently work at home half-time or more. Regular work at home has grown 173% since 2005. 43% of employees work remotely with some frequency. 56% of employees have a job where at least some of what they do could be done remotely. Studies repeatedly show desks are vacant 50 to 60% of the time, and 80% of employees want to work from home at least some of the time. I can tell you for Milford, since everyone's experienced the impacts of COVID-19, we're certainly assessing the work technologies that we have and the job functions to address remote capabilities, such as having laptops, having docking stations, so that we're able to be prepared in the event that COVID-19 happens, or if we're able to provide telework arrangements for our employees on a regular basis. Next slide, please. For many of us, we certainly have more flexibility in this time. So our next polling question I want to ask, what has been the best part of working from home?
You can see the responses that we have. It looks like fewer distractions and interruptions is one of the big ones, and the reduced commuting time also.
Yeah, that's really good. And I saw a funny answer too, not having to get dressed. So that's definitely a plus.
You cut out there, Jamesha. What did you say?
I said I also saw another comment from someone else saying not having to get dressed. So I definitely think that's a plus for many of us. Next slide, please. There are several benefits to telework for employees, including increased productivity, improved morale and quality of work, increased level of flexibility, and greater work-life balance. The only one that I frequently see sometimes where it should be a benefit that sometimes ends up being a struggle for many employees is the work-life balance. Because they're at home and they're teleworking, sometimes they don't have a defined line of when to cut it off. So they may be emailing late nights or weekends, and that's going to be very important to be able to establish the boundaries, the same as you would have if you were physically sitting in an office. Next slide, please. Benefits for employers. Improved rate of employee retention allows for a balance in health and productivity, cost effective, and also a recruitment tool to attract top talent. And this one is very important because in January, the unemployment rate was around 3.6%. And at that time, I know for us in Milford, and I'm sure for a few others as well, we definitely had some challenges with recruitment because of that low unemployment rate. Next slide, please. While there's certainly some advantages to telework, there's definitely some drawbacks as well. One in particular is security concerns. I think everyone has seen all the stories in the news about cybersecurity, protecting data, and that's one of the things that's going to be very important if you have someone teleworking, for them to be knowledgeable about firewalls, passwords, encryption, and knowing how to minimize security risk. Another drawback is less oversight because that employee is not in the office on a daily basis. You don't have that direct oversight of them. So you do have to find a way to manage their remote work to ensure they're still producing quality work and that they're still producing at a high level. Also, the lack of brainstorming. Some remote workers can feel isolated and having a difficult time collaborating because they're not physically in the office. I think it's going to be really important to have face-to-face meetings. You can utilize Zoom, GoToMeeting, Adobe Connect. I think Facebook just launched a new meeting system that they've been using. So I think if you incorporate those things, it'll help you overcome some of the potential obstacles. Production loss. While there's so many great advantages to telework, there are going to be some employees that are not going to do well in a teleworking situation. And I think during that time when you're assessing it, you're going to have constant feedback and dialogue. And when you see that that's not working, you're going to probably need to bring that person back into the office. So I think that's going to definitely be important. And the last one would be career disadvantages. Some employees believe they need that face-to-face communication all the time, or it could maybe lack in them being able to have career advancement opportunities. And I think that's where it's going to be important to keep the communication open, have regular feedback sessions, the same as you would do with an employee that's in the office 5 days a week. Next slide, please. So we definitely know there's been some challenges. Schools have closed, but there's still requirements, for work assignments for students. So you're working, you're also doing homework assignments. So the next poll question is, what has been your biggest challenge while working from home?
So it looks like juggling both my work and the children's schoolwork seems to be a challenge for people. And interestingly, the distractions and interruptions does not seem to be a big impediment. So that's good. All right.
All right, next slide, please. SHRM created a really great article that I saw that talks about engaging with remote employees. And these are some of the top 5 that they had out there that I thought would be very important. Prioritizing communication. Even if they're remote, still make sure they're kept in a loop, important communication. And one thing too, simply because someone's remote does not mean that you have to email everything to them. You can call them. You can have a certain day a week that you call to catch up on upcoming projects that you have for them, things that they have for you. Just keep that dialogue open on both ends. The second part is set clear expectations. The expectations for the work quality and the production should still be the same, regardless of where they're actually performing the work. And I think that's going to be really important for employees to know what's expected of them. And I think that helps them while they're working remote. And it also will help the supervisor be able to accurately assess their performance. Recognizing good work. I think everyone knows across the board that employee recognition in various ways helps boost engagement, and it also keeps the morale high. And I think there's different ways that you can recognize employees that are remote. If you're in a GoToMeeting or if you're on whatever technology that you're using, in those slides, you could have slides where you're recognizing them for performance. So everyone will see what's happening. There's little star awards that you can put on slides. There's different ways that you can be innovative and creative to still recognize employees that you don't see on a daily basis. Encouraging the work-life balance. The work-life balance is very important. I have noticed with people who do telework sometimes, they work longer hours than they would need in the office than they traditionally would do in the office. And also, there's not really necessarily a need for them to work those hours and send those emails. But I think because they have the access there, you know, they continuously do that. But that work-life balance is going to be very important for employees, and to help employees keep away from the burnout. And demonstrating a collaborative culture. Every employee should feel like they're a part of the team, no matter where they're working. And I think supervisors should definitely take a lead role in making sure that everyone knows that they're working together, they have the same goals, and regardless of the location, you know, the vision and what needs to be done still remains the same. Next slide, please. So now we're at the section for interactive discussion, so we can take any comments or any questions that anyone may have.
This is Troy, and in reaction to that poll answer where schoolwork was the #1 impediment to teleworking at the moment, and given that it's really unprecedented situation right now, and you just can't avoid disturbances in many cases, I'm curious how municipalities are adjusting or reconsidering leave policies, or simply encouraging employees to take leave, if at all, right now.
Troy, are you referencing annual leave?
Well, I mean, it's a forced telework situation for most people right now. So I'm curious if, because, as you said, good telework relies on, you know, not having all those disturbances, and people are recognizing that a big impediment right now is helping their children with schoolwork, as an example. I'm just curious how, if at all, municipalities are dealing with employees who just are finding it impossible to do telework because of those impediments right now, or very challenging. Is leave part of the equation?
Does anyone have any feedback or comments? I can say, like, for ourselves in Milford, we haven't had any issues with the telework, but what we haven't done, we haven't placed any restrictions on vacation. So employees are still able to take their vacation time if they need it. So we haven't placed any restrictions around that, but we haven't had any issues with employees finding the balance between telework and the other responsibilities that they have at home.
I think this is Anne Marie. One of my thoughts on that is you know, telework requires a greater deal of trust, and I think that it's important that we develop that trust with employees, that they understand that they're, you know, we're expecting 8 hours out of them in a day. If, you know, they end up having to spend from 2 to 3 on schoolwork, then maybe they make that up another time. But I think it also goes to the idea that rather than watching somebody at their desk or monitoring that they're at their desk as they do in the office, it really looks more like monitoring the employee output, and is the work getting done becomes more important than where are they sitting at what time. If anybody wants to speak up on this, you can certainly raise your hand or throw something in the Q&A or chat box. Jamesha, I have a question. You know, one of the things with the current crisis is that it's kind of thrust us into telework. And in some cases that's great. In some cases, like you mentioned, you know, some employees, due to, you know, whatever reason, may not really be cut out for telework. Are there any suggestions that you have for us for dealing with an employee who may not be the ideal telework candidate, but has health conditions that may require them to telework longer than longer than we would necessarily desire.
And Marie, I would say when the general telework is one thing, but when we get to the point of teleworking due to health conditions, now we're going into reasonable accommodations under the ADA. And I think in that case, if someone has a health condition that will require them to telework, there's a sample form that you can fill out and attach your job description to have the physician know what they would be able to do in that telework environment. And I think that will be something that would be important. The second part would be they're not ideal for telework, but what are the reasons why they're not ideal? Is there something that we could help them improve upon to help them, be more productive, at home? I think it's figuring out where their weaknesses are to see if there's something that we could help them improve upon so that they can be productive at home. But I think if it's due to a medical condition, I definitely think we need to look at the reasonable accommodation for that, particularly if there's no option for them to work in the office.
Okay, I've unmuted Mary Ellen. Do you have a question or comment?
Sure, it's a question and a comment. We are encountering, obviously transitioning our employees to working at home, various scenarios of, because there's an expectation that everyone has high-speed internet and space to have and also equipment to work at home. So some of the challenges that we have seen in Newark is equipment. Not everyone has a laptop at home, and scrambling to try to retrofit that. So that speaks to technology and being able to purchase technology with that in mind moving forward. The portability, because we have a lot of employees who have only desktop units. And the other is, we have some employees that's not a work requirement to have high-speed internet at home. And in order to work at home, you need that. And and the equity issues regarding that. Do we require that employee to work in the office now, or do we, we're working to accommodate people to work at home in that scenario? But that's been a challenge. So any thoughts on that would be helpful.
Jamesha?
I couldn't hear the last part. It cut out.
She asked if there were any thoughts on those issues that she raised, the technology and, high-speed internet may not be available.
How many employees do you have that impacts? Have you done an analysis yet to figure out how many employees are impacted by those items?
I don't have the numbers, but our IT people do. Anecdotally regarding the equipment, and I just saw a comment from Teresa Tiemann, and that's what we did. We did recycle old police equipment and laptops and anything that we can get our hands on. Anecdotally, I would say regarding the equipment, there's probably about 30%, at least in the world that I deal with. I don't know office-wide. And we have had some connectivity issues with about 10% of my staff, but I don't have that office-wide.
Okay, so it looks like it's not primarily the majority. Now, the people who do not have the technology to be able to work from home and the resources, and they're having to come to the office, are you getting any pushback from them about that?
Well, we haven't taken that step yet. We're still trying to work out the technology. We have gotten some discussion and some challenges to overcome with some others who might have the technology, but they're not set up to work at home. Even if we give them the equipment, they're just not suited, I guess, to work at home. So we've
Okay.
so what we've done there is we've scheduled office time for those folks because they don't mind coming into the office.
Coming into the office. Okay. So I think there's two things I really would look at with that, and I actually would probably, if you have like a legal counsel, I probably would send that to them in terms of for the employees that do not have the technology and they do not have the internet. It could be, you know, cost-wise, it could be a lot of the locations that they live, they may not have a carrier that can provide that, of figuring out how best to balance that, because if they don't have those options available, and everyone else is able to telework, will that create any morale issues for them because they have to come in the office? Or what kind of workaround options could you have for that? So I think that would be important. I know in Bank of America, we had an actual, it was a little fob that connected, and that's how we were able to get on to connect to the internet. So there was a code. So each time we log in, they would be able to track to see how long we were online and be able to track that part of it. But I think one of the things is to figure out how many people you have that do not have those resources. The laptop part, you know, you would be able to work that through the budget, but the part of the internet would really be the part that's the primary issue. And also, too, are those employees able to telework? Are you going to have any issues with any of those performance issues with them, or do those employees need to be in the office?
So, Jamesha, we do have a number of questions that have come through the Q&A or comments, and also through the chat. Terry Tiemann says that Georgetown said that they've recycled old police tough books to give to employees to work from home. We did the same thing. We have the same IT provider. And then Sam Callender asks, can you require an employee to use their personally owned equipment for office use?
Sam, that one I can certainly follow back up with you. I definitely want to send that one over for legal to review that one.
Okay. And then we've got, and Matt Harline from Dover says, we're making a list of department heads and others who should have a laptop as their primary computer to make telework more seamless. The laptop would plug into the city network when on site and operate through a VPN when they're at home. And then June Merritt from Seaford said her biggest hindrance to telework is location in her home. Since the city does not have laptops to issue, she had to take her desktop computer home. She's limited to location in her home due to internet connections, so she's between the kitchen and the living room, which causes distraction by others that are entering and leaving the areas. Also, when you take a call from work, it's hard to find a quiet location. Any words of wisdom there?
For June, we have the same experience in Milford. We don't actually have varieties of laptops and docking stations. I know, like for myself, I just have a PC. I don't have a laptop or a docking station, and that's one of the things that we're looking at and we're putting into the budget for this year. So I think we all are kind of experiencing some of those same things. Now, I'm not sure where their budget year is at or if they have something budgeted in there, but I do think it would be good to do an analysis of what people could primarily telework on a regular basis and maybe budget those items in there for laptop use. But I know for us in Milford, we have the same thing. Most of us have PCs. We don't actually have laptops and docking stations that make it really easy for us to telework.
Okay. Are there, Mark Whitfield, I unmuted you. You had your hand up. Did you still have a question?
Sure.
Comment?
I started typing it out, but I can ask it. We talked about the laptops. What about the telephone? Do employees get stipends for either their personal cell phone or a landline? And how do customers get in touch with employees via telephone? Do you forward the city phones to their private lines, or how does that work?
I can tell you how we're doing this, and again, right now we're in an unprecedented time, but in Lewis, we have all of our city lines are forwarded to one city cell phone that we have an employee taking the calls, and then she will disperse the calls. We have sent city phones with several other people that will need to make calls to follow up. And that way they don't have to use their own phone. But we have a very limited number of city phones that we've deployed for that purpose. And it's mainly people who will need to be making calls to the public so that they don't have to use their own phone. Are there any other questions that we have before we move on? I don't see any more in the chat box. And it is a little bit after 12:30. June Merritt said Seaford forwarded each administration department employee extension to their personal phone or a city issued phone. Only a handful of employees have cell phones. So yeah, we do have a number of people using their personal cell phones, but what we made sure is that anybody who was going to be receiving or making calls to the public that, you don't necessarily want your personal number out there, we did make sure we gave them cell phones. So we do want to thank you all for joining us. Our next Lunch and Learn is next Friday at noon, and we will be joined by Jennifer Daniels, who is a doctoral student and a social worker, and she will be talking to us about managing our well-being. And I think that's probably 6-8 weeks into this, very timely. So again, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you all next week.